Editor's note. This is part 2 of chapter 3. Part 1 will be down in the description as well as in the eye icon. Be sure to watch part 1 if you haven't. The bar of Burn was actually rather quiet, the only noise being the music that softly played from the jukebox. Taeyang sat at the bar corner drinking from his glass slowly. He wasn't like Crow when it came to alcohol. Taeyang didn't like getting drunk, so he usually drank slowly, and he always made sure to keep himself from getting even the slightest buzz. When the blonde man drank, he drank to think, and his daughter sat at the center of his thoughts. Staring at the copper-colored liquid in his glass, Taeyang wondered how he could have let this happen. How could he treat his own daughter in this manner for all these years? As far as he was concerned, he has failed as a father. He had failed to see all the hints that Yang was giving off. He failed to notice exactly when her smile and laugh became fake. He failed to notice when Yang had to put on a mask to hide all the hurt that he and Crow had inflicted over the years. Taeyang lifted his drink to take another sip. It all made sense now. Yang's reckless behavior and her adrenaline thrill-seeking attitude was all a mask. A mask that she had to put on to hide all of her insecurities. It was nothing more than a coping mechanism that she had created in order to protect herself from all the hurt she felt, and so people think she was strong. Taeyang was roused from his thought when a couple of loud, boisterous voices came at the entrance of the bar. He turned his head slightly to the left to get a look at the people who was ruining the quiet and peaceful atmosphere. What he saw were two men who were now taking their seat at the table that was 15 feet behind him. He would have thought none of them had he not seen the bandages wrapped around the right arm of the large man. He recognized this man. Gray, he thought with an annoyed huff. Eyeing the spot on the injury, feelings of suspicion began to rise in his chest. Interesting wound. I noticed why he came back with some blood on his fur. I'll wait it out, in case he's attacking someone without proof. Dude, what the hell? How the hell did you miss? You had a clear shot! Asked a short bald man with a French fox beard. Gray sneered at the shorter man. Give me a break, will ya? That girl's shitty ass dog bit me. It threw off my aim. Still, can't believe you let her get away like that. That bitch got lucky. Don't worry though. Next time I see that cunt, I'll make sure I don't miss. Just make sure it doesn't get away next time. I don't know why the Council of Vale hadn't put out a warrant for her arrest yet, but it looks like it's all up to us to dole out some justice. Taeyang was absolutely livid. His vision began to fill with white as his anger burned to new heights. His hand clutched around the glass so tightly that it started to crack. Yang, I may not have been a great father, but I fully intend to make it up to you. So I'll start with this prick. He thought with finality. Raised from his seat, Taeyang started to walk over to where Gray sat. When he reached him, Taeyang stopped shy of 2 feet behind him, with his drink still in his hand. Gray sensed someone behind him, turning around to look at Taeyang. Upon seeing him, he let out an annoyed sigh. What do you want, Xiaolong? Gray said with a contempt laced in his voice. Oh, nothing really. Couldn't help but overhear you assholes talking about how you tried to kill my daughter, that's all. He said as he glared down at the seated men. Gray rose from his seat. He then moved well within Taeyang's personal space, towering over him. Oh? What exactly are you gonna do about it, huh? You're gonna beat me up? He spoke condescendingly, looking down at the blonde man. Bringing his eyes up to meet the taller man, Taeyang gave a dry chuckle. Oh no, I don't intend to beat you up. He paused, bringing his glass to his mouth. Taeyang tilted his head back, downing the rest of the content in his glass. He brought his head back down to lock eye with Gray, with a vicious grin forming on his face. Taeyang said, I'm gonna kill you. The moment the last word came from his mouth, Taeyang smashed the glass across Gray's face, causing the large man to howl in pain as he brought his hand up to clutch his face. He then grabbed Gray by the collar of his shirt and threw him out of the bar. Taeyang turned to the bartender and threw some lian on the counter. As for the glass that just broke, he said as he walked calmly towards the door. He stopped in front of the bald man, staring down at him maliciously. Taeyang said, if you know what's good for you, then stay out of this fight. If you don't, then I'll break you. Gulping, the bald man nodded his head. Satisfied, Taeyang continued his way towards the entrance. When he exited the bar, he saw Gray picking himself up while pulling out the shards of glass that was embedded in his skin. When he finished, the large man shot Taeyang a dangerous glare. You done it now, Xiaolong. I'm gonna make sure you never leave here alive. Tsk, please. You've never been able to beat me. Ever since our time both as Signal and Beacon, you never beaten me in anything, whether it be academics or combat. I've always been better. I just remember kicking your dumb ass around in combat class. Taiyang smirked confidently, taking great satisfaction in knowing how his taunts were affecting the other man. Now the bright yellow-haired man decided to go him over. Shit, I even beat you when it comes to women. I still remember how you tried so desperately to get Raven's attention, only for her to give you that nasty scar across her nose. She wasn't interested in you at all. However, I was able to get into a relationship with her, and even had a kid with her. And then there's Summer. She wanted nothing to do with you either. You tried so hard only to get beaten by me once again. And she even graced me with another daughter, he said as smugly as possible. Enraged, Gray yelled as he charged at Taiyang. He reached behind him to pull out his weapon, extending it to reveal a large battle staff. Leather was wrapped around the middle for better grip, and there was 2 small cylinders just above and below the leather, with 2 large cylinders on top of the smaller ones. He lifted his battle staff over his head and swung down at Taiyang. Taiyang responded by reaching out with his right hand to grab his opponent's weapon, halting its advance. Taiyang looked up at Gray and smiled. He curled his left hand into a fist and slammed it to his opponent's stomach, twisting his fist for added insult and pain. While his opponent doubled over in pain, Taiyang took advantage of the opening that his opponent gave. Jumping, he delivered a vicious roundhouse kick to the side of his head, sending his opponent flying through the air and into an empty crate. Taiyang heard small mutters over to the right of him. Looking over his shoulder, he could see a crowd beginning to form across from him. He turned attention away from the crowd and back to his opponent to spy him struggling to rise up to his feet. Taiyang went into a classic orthodox boxing stance. He didn't want Gray to regain his strength. However, before he could continue his assault, Taiyang heard a familiar bark coming from the crowd. A moment later, he saw Zwei jumping over the crowd and landed right in front of him. The kouri was frantically barking and spinning in circles. Zwei ran over to him, bit down on his left shoe, and started to tug towards the edge of the town. Sensing trouble, Taiyang kneeled down, giving Zwei his full attention, while keeping Gray within his peripherals. "What is it, Zwei? What's wrong?" the blonde asked hastily, his voice rich with worry. Barking increasingly, Zwei started jumping wildly in the air. He then stopped and pointed his entire body towards the direction of the house. Taiyang now understood what Zwei was telling him. He was trying to tell him that Yang was in trouble. Standing up, he looked over to Gray, who was now on his feet, but still clenching his stomach. His breathing heavy, as he was still trying to regain the air that Taiyang forced out with his punch. "I'll come back for you when I'm done helping my daughter," Taiyang growled angrily. Before he could start running towards his daughter, a large golden dome of fire had appeared out in the distance. His eyes widened at the sight of the massive structure of fire. Never in his life has he ever seen something like that. The people of Burm noticed it too. They were all too shocked to understand the danger that they were in, and thus merely stared at the awesome flaming structure. Then almost as quickly as the dome came to their side, it exploded into the sky. A second later, Taiyang and the townspeople were wrought by a large shockwave. The sonic boom that was created caused people of Burm to scream in pain and fear. Of course, it was hard for Taiyang to hear the screaming since he was dealing with the painful and obnoxious ringing in his ear. Zwei had it worse because his ears were more sensitive. They were assaulted by hurricane-force wind, some people getting picked up by the wind and thrown into various different objects in the town. Taiyang dropped flat into the ground and on top of Zwei to prevent the tiny kouri from flying away. He dug his finger deeply into the ground to keep himself from meeting the same fate as some of the residents of Burm. "I can't stay here. Whatever the fuck is happening, it's coming from where Yang is. I need to get to her, now!" Summoning all his strength, Taiyang quickly rose up to his feet, holding Zwei securely in his right arm. Taiyang then bursted into a sprint. Nothing would stop him from reaching his daughter. He had made a promise to be a better father to Yang, and he was determined to make good on it. Despite the powerful gusts, he ran with such speed that he could have sworn he'd gotten Ruby's semblance. When he reached the entrance of Burm, he noticed that the clouds were on fire, and the sky turning red. Sensing danger, his battle instinct forced him to jump forward to avoid a red bolt of lightning. His mouth was ajar with astonishment. He couldn't believe that he just saw a red lightning bolt. Looking up, he saw vortexes of fire beginning to form in the sky. He was thankful that none of them landed near him. Shaking his head violently, he forced himself to get back to the task at hand. Sprinting into the direction of his home once again. A few minutes later, he felt the ground begin to rumble under his feet. Then all of a sudden, the earth under him began to split open. Eyes widening in surprise, Taiyang jumped to avoid falling into the gap that had formed. The instant he landed, the ground shot up, throwing him and Zwei forward through the air and into a large tree, causing the huntsman to yell in pain. As soon as he landed on the ground, he immediately recovered to his feet and continued to run to his daughter. An intense wave of heat hit him, only got worse the closer he came to the large column of fire. Taiyang began sweating bullets as his entire body damped with his own sweat. His wife wasn't faring any better. Taiyang could feel his dog hyperventilating. The corgi body was desperately trying to cool itself off. Sensing danger, Taiyang looked to his right just in time to hurdle over an uproot tree that was thrown at him. Landing, Taiyang hunched over, gasping for air. The fires around him made it significantly harder to breathe as they used the oxygen in the air to fuel themselves. He was now sweating buckets. It was also difficult for him to keep his eyes open as the heat burned at them, destroying any moisture that accumulated after blinking. Taiyang could feel that he was seriously dehydrated now, his vision growing hazy as his consciousness threatened to leave him. No, I have to get to my daughter. I have to help her. I can't allow anything to stop me. With renewed vigor, Taiyang took off. He was more determined than ever to come to his daughter's aid. He would not allow him to let her down again. After running a few hundred yards, he noticed the pillar began to shrink. With its shrinking, the temperature around him also declined. Taiyang was not a religious man in any sense. Even he was thanking the gods for this. He also noticed that the earthquake went away. The earth beneath his feet was calm once again. The scarlet color in the sky was slowly disappearing and the red lightning vanished. The veteran huntsman also noticed that the fire tornado were gone as well, and the wind started to return to normal. With the exception of the raging forest fire, calm returned the patch. When Taiyang came out to a clearing, his eyes widened in surprise. He was dangerously close to the edge of the island. He planted his feet onto the ground to try and stop himself from going over the edge. Unfortunately, because of the momentum he had built up, he started skidding across the ground. Closer and closer he came to the edge until he came to a sudden stop. His feet were halfway on the edge of patch and his body leaned over. Carefully, Taiyang threw himself backwards. He landed on the ground on his rear end. Letting out a breath of relief, the blond man looked up and what he saw shocked him to his core. Before him was a half-filled black crater with water from the ocean still rushing in to fill it. Blinking several times, he moved his head from left to right to survey the area. Putting his wide down, Taiyang stood up and looked in awe at the scene before him. "Where the hell is the rest of the island?" he said with a shaky voice. Panic then shot through his entire body. If half the island was gone, then where's his daughter? Where is she? Where's my baby? Where's my daughter? Taiyang was searching frantically for Yang. He only hoped that she wasn't in the water. Just then, a feather of golden fire landed on his nose. Blinking several times, Taiyang reached out and grabbed it. Huh? A fiery feather? Confusion etched on his face. A moment later, he saw more feathers falling from the sky, landing all over what was left of the island. He stared at one particular feather, gently falling onto a dead deer. He watched in fascination as the feather burst into a small flame. What he saw next was perhaps the most amazing thing he'd ever seen. The flame sank to the deer's corpse, and a second later, a golden glow enveloped it. Once it disappeared, Taiyang looked with wide eyes as the deer opened his eyes and stood up. Life had returned to it. After looking around, the deer then ran away into the forest. He squinted his eyes as another bright glow entered his vision from his right. Turning, Taiyang saw that the same yellow glow that was on the deer was now on several different trees. The bark of the trees slowly went from charcoal black back to a healthy brown. The leaves even started to grow back. The feather was restoring life to what was destroyed. Taiyang then brought his eyes up to follow to where the feathers were falling from. Eventually, he spotted something in the sky. It was a humanoid-shaped golden flame with large feathery bird wings. Is that Yang? Truthfully, he didn't know if it was his daughter or not, but he had to find out. Covering both of his hands, he brought them up to the side of his mouth. Yang! Is that you? Yelling as loud as his lungs allowed him, he watched as the creature turned his head to look down at him. A moment later, it turned its body and started to descend towards him. He followed the fiery creature's descent. He still had no idea if it was Yang, or if it was just a monster that was coming to tear him apart. Eventually, the being of fire landed a few feet in front of him. Fire bursting from his feet as it landed. His heart was beating hard in his chest. He was really hoping that this was indeed his daughter, and that she wasn't dead. He noticed that the thing in front of him had pure red eyes, no iris, and no pupil. Gulping, Taiyang tentatively asked, Yang? Is that you? Zwei put his nose in the air to sniff several times. He started blinking at the creature. Eventually, he barked at it and then gave his famous doggy smile. He ran over to it and began jumping up and down around it. Taiyang watched his dog practically dancing around the thing in front of him. He then put the pieces together and smiled. So this is Yang. Putting his hand over his heart, Taiyang let out a breath of relief. When Zwei stopped, the fire from Yang started to flake out from her feet. Taiyang watched as the fire continued to disappear, revealing more and more of his daughter. Eventually, the last of the fire flaked off of her head and her hair returned to normal. It seemed like Yang was okay, until he saw her eyes roll up to the back of her head and started falling forward. Taiyang reached across to his daughter to catch her limp form in his arm. He gently eased her into the ground so that she could lay in his arm more comfortably. Two small yellow glows from the right side of Yang's body caught his attention. When he looked at the source of said glow, he saw that from where Yang's arm was cut off, there was still golden fire. The strange thing was that the fire had solidified into a pure yellow energy. This solid energy was in the shape of the rest of the missing arm. He also noticed the same golden energy coming from the right side of her waist. Moments later, the golden energy began to crack. More cracks started to litter both her arms and whatever the other thing was. Soon enough, the solid golden energy was shattered. Taiyang's eyes widened. The cast of solid energy had broken off, revealing soft peach-colored flesh. He couldn't believe what he saw. Yang had her arm back. She had literally grown her arm back. Taiyang then looked at his daughter's waist to see what was left behind. It was a golden wing. Yang, what are you? He said softly as he moved one of her bangs out of her face. Yang started to stir in her father's arm. She let out a small groan as she began to widely open her eyes. Her vision was hazy and unfocused as she struggled to recognize the person above her. When her eyes began to focus, she could make out subtle yellow hair. Dad? She asked feebly. Taiyang smiled brightly at her. He instinctively pulled his daughter into a gentle hug as to not hurt her. He pulled away from her and gave her a small kiss on her head. Oh, thank dust you're okay, Yang. He gave her old man quite a scare. Looking at her father's loving gaze, Yang began to pull herself up. Sitting up on her own, Yang looked up at her father. What happened? What do you mean I give you a scare? Her father nodded to her right. She turned her head to see that there was nothing but ocean in front of her. Alarmed, Yang quickly turned her entire body. What happened? Dad? Where's the house? Why am I outside? Where's the rest of the island? Her heart rate rising. Panic started creeping up her spine. A moment later, she felt her father's gently cuff her face and turned it towards her. Yang, I need you to calm down, okay? Don't panic, just breathe. Yang closed her eyes and followed her father's advice, breathing in and out slowly and deeply. She felt her heart rate returning to normal. When she opened her eyes, her father smiled at her. Good. Now, as for your questions, I'm gonna be honest, kiddo. I was hoping you would tell me. Yang looked down at the ground. I honestly don't know. I just remember an intense burning pain, and everything else was just a blank. It's okay, Yang. If you don't remember anything, then don't strain yourself trying to. Taiyang said as he put his right hand on the small of his daughter's back, rubbing it in gently circular motion. Besides, I got something to show you, and I think it will make you very happy. He then looked at her father with a raised brow. What is it? Her father reached over to her right with his left arm. She felt sensation in her arm that she hadn't felt for months. He brought her right arm up in front of her face. Her eyes flew open in surprise. It was the rest of her arm. She then willed her right hand to close shut. And it did. It was real. She had her arm back. Taiyang watched as his daughter's mouth slowly formed a large smile. Happiness filled his heart when his daughter tugged her arm as she cried tears of joy. For the first time in a long while, her daughter was happy. After finishing her mini celebration, Yang looked up at him. How did this happen? Like I said, Yang, I was hoping you would tell me. I don't know how I did this either. But don't worry, sweetie. I'm sure you'll figure this out. Also, you might want to have a look at your waist. He said as he pointed to her right. Huh? Yang followed her father's finger down. She let out a gasp. There was a yellow wing protruding from her waist. Is this real? Yang then willed her wing to move to see if it was really a part of her. To her surprise, it did move. She was actually twisting it around, flapping it, even stretched it. Okay, this is weird. Yeah, no kidding. The important thing is that you're not hurt. That's all I really care about. Yang smiled softly at him. Looking up, her red eyes held an inquisitive look. Were you really scared? Taeyang put his hand over Yang's. You're damn straight I was scared. Yang, I was absolutely terrified. Thought of losing you scared the hell out of me. I don't know what I'd do if I found you dead. Thank dust that didn't happen. Before Yang could respond, she saw her father's happy face turn into a frown. He then turned his head to the left, sensing something was wrong. She followed her father's gaze towards a large mob of people staring across from them. These were the residents of Burm. She didn't know why they were here, but she knew it wasn't going to be for anything good, especially if the weapon they brought was any indication of that. She gasped as she looked into their eyes. All she could see was hate that was being aimed at her. Taeyang immediately stood up. He walked in front of his daughter, standing protectively in front of her. He could sense that these people were about to attack at any moment, and he knew what they were here for. They were here to kill his little sunshine. You people better turn back now, if you know what's good for you. There was a lot of us and only one of you. You think we're afraid of you, Xiaolong? The mayor said. You're even dumber than I took you for if you think a bunch of weak-ass villagers can beat me. Dad? What's going on? Why are they here? Yang was trembling in place, fear wrapping his icy tendrils around her heart. He looked over his shoulder towards Yang. Yang, listen to me very closely. When I tell you to run, you run. Understood? But Yang, he interrupted his daughter softly. Please, don't argue with me. Just do as I say, okay? I can't fight with you here, Taeyang said with a certain kind of steel in his voice that she never heard before. She nodded at him. Good. Taeyang brought his attention back to the mob. I mean it! If you guys take one step towards my child, and you saw it, can consider yourself dead. He could feel the hidden power within his fist rising. Taeyang knew his threats wouldn't work, but he was hoping it would. The moment he saw someone begin to advance, his eyes flashed with anger. He slammed his foot as hard as he could into the ground, breaking a head-sized chunk of earth beneath him. The force of the stomp made it fly up to face level. He then struck it with the palm of his hand, sending it sailing through the air. It smashed against the head of the advancing town person, killing him instantly. The people of Burm was paralyzed with shock. Using their shock to his advantage, he turned to his daughter and yelled, Run! Yang then weakly stood up. She started to run, nearly falling several times. Her body was sore and weak from the power she had unknowingly released. The mob's shock ran out as they noticed Yang running to the forest. They began to turn towards her, but Taeyang jumped in front of them, effectively blocking their way to his daughter. You want her? Then you're gonna have to go through me! He screamed at the top of his lungs. The mob was now more than eager to take up his challenge. As they started to rush him, the angry huntsman let out an impressive roar as he jumped into the crowd. He brought his fist down into the ground, creating a small shockwave that forced the front row to fall, which forced the people behind him to either trip over them or stop entirely. Taeyang ran to the mayor, who just started to get up, and let loose a bone-crushing fist straight to the front of his face. The sickening sound of bone breaking echoed. The mayor's body was sent skidding across the ground, smashing into a few people. When the body came to a complete stop, it was clear to the people of Burm that their mayor was dead. A man with a woodcutter's axe charged at the blonde man. He swung his weapon across his body only for Taeyang to defiantly duck under the attack. Taeyang then countered with a powerful uppercut. The sound of a cervical breaking echoed loudly. His opponent died instantly. Another man ran at him, thrusting a spear at the huntsman. Taeyang bobbed and weaved out of the way of the opponent's sloppy attack. The man then wildly swung his spear horizontally. Taeyang dropped to the ground, holding himself up with his hand as he stuck his leg out as he did a full 360-degree spin to sweep his attacker's leg. Before his opponent fell to the ground, Taeyang reached out and grabbed the opponent's right leg. He then stood up and spun around once before letting go. The man dropped his spear as he sailed through the air, slamming to 3 other people and throwing them off the edge of the island and into the water. Frowning, Taeyang turned around to see a man with a scimitar over his head preparing to swing down at him. However, before the veteran huntsman could respond, he saw his wife burning through the air with his head down to deliver a skull-crushing headbutt to the side of the attacker's head, killing him instantly. Zwei, landing in front of Taeyang, looked at him and barked. He smiled at the corgi. Awesome job, Zwei, he congratulated. Sensing danger, both man and dog looked up to see that they were surrounded. Man and his best friend standing back to back in the middle of a ring that was created, both fighting for a common cause. He could hear Zwei growling dangerously. Tang looked over his shoulder to Zwei. "You ready, buddy?" Zwei gave a bark of acknowledgement. Tang smirked. "Alright then. Remember, Zwei, don't hold back." After a moment, both man and dog charged in opposite direction, both determined to keep Yang safe.